Midnight in Amber, Part 3, Babes in the Woods, Chapter 4. Evening was closing in when they arrived on the slope above the town. It was little more than a village, really, but it was large enough to have a small dock for its shallow harbor. "This is Hallowell. There," Savarin pointed at the tall mast rising above the town in the harbor. "There is your ship. Gaining passage may be difficult, but gold will buy your way anywhere. I only hope that you have some with you." As they stood there, they watched the sails rise and fill. "I think they intend to leave without us," Keltry mused. They hurried down the slope into the village. Savarin pulled his hood up to shadow his face, and Landros followed his example. The group garnered a few glances as they hurried down the streets towards the small dock, but no one stopped them or questioned their hurry. No longer able to see the masts, they began to run. When they reached the dock, the ship was already riding the tide in the harbor. "Well, looks like we missed it," Rog announced, rocking on his heels in relief. Lark bent to him. "Yes, but if we miss boat, we cannot rescue little ones." Rog stopped rocking. After a moment of thinking, he began to curse under his breath in Dwarven. Looking around, Lark noticed a small boat nearby with a man just climbing out of it. She ran over. "Excuse," she said breathlessly. "Favor from me, ça va?" she pleaded, giving the man her best look of innocent desperation. "What can I help you with?" he asked. She pointed out into the harbor. "That boat. Have to get on it." He shook his head. "Sorry, miss. Can't be done. She's a cargo ship, not a passenger ship, and the captain's a little weird on having women on board." Lark reached into her pocket and pulled out 3 pieces of gold, her last 3, and handed them to him. "Take us anyway?" He grumbled, but climbed back into his boat. "Come on, then." Ivaska bounded over, looked down at the boat some feet below him, and whimpered as Lark began climbing down. The others were quick to follow, though Rog hesitated. He reached into his pack and pulled out Lark's glowing stone and put it in his pocket. Gritting his teeth, he climbed down into the boat. Lark looked up, saw Ivaska still on the dock. She grumbled, summoned up a poltergeist to lift him off the dock and down into the boat. He struggled, whimpering. Once his feet were soundly on the bottom of the boat, he promptly crawled between Lark's feet and laid down, tail between his legs and his whole massive body shaking. "Huh, some guard dog," the boatman muttered as he began to row them out to the ship. "I understand completely, Shaggy," Rog grunted, holding onto the side of the boat with a white-knuckled grip. "I understand completely." 10 minutes later, they were within shouting distance of the vessel, and the boatman yelled at them. "Hail Andromeda!" A face appeared over the side of the ship, a lantern held up to aid his eyes in the approaching dusk. "Waldron, what do you want now? All the crew's been accounted for." "Get the captain. I got passengers." "He ain't gonna take passengers, and you know it." "Well," he shouted back, "these folks ain't gonna take no for an answer." The man shipboard grumbled and disappeared. By the time they reached the side of the vessel, another man leaned over the rail. His hair was thick and wild in the wind, and one eye was covered by a black patch, but he squinted down at the little boat. "I don't take no passengers," he bellowed. Lark stood up in the bow of the boat, her hands planted firmly on her hips. "Throw down rope, me bucko. I'm not conducting business shouting." "With ruined voice," she added, lower. Keltry leaned back on his elbows. "Going to negotiate for us?" he asked as they waited. "Do you think it wise, considering it has been stated that he is a little weird on women on board?" The rope landed practically on top of her, to snickering from above. She grabbed hold. "Precisely why should," she said, testing its security. "Oh, I have money to offer him," she asked. "Used the last coin to get this far." Keltry pulled a small pouch from his belt. "This is part of what I was given by the Lord Mayor to finance us. You can offer all of that if you need to." She caught the bag neatly, tucked it down in the front of her blouse, and began climbing. From above, it appeared as though she were effortlessly walking up the side of the vessel as she used her feet to help. She swung one leg over the rail in short order and balanced there. She pulled the bag from her cleavage and tossed it to the captain. He barely caught it, peeked into it, and saw a good number of gold coins with a few small gemstones winking back at him. He tucked it in his fist and glared hard at her. "That," she said, "is passage for friends and self to small island southwest of here. It's not out of way." "I said before, this ain't no passenger ship. I'm fully loaded and headed south," he growled. "Should pick up very valuable cargo on island. Stolen cargo will make heroes if get to Portswain safe." "Portswain!" he exclaimed. He threw the money back at her. Forget it, lady. No cargo is worth that risk. She dangled the bag by its strings. If take us, stay there, wait for return, and take back into Portswain, there will be this and more from Lord Mayor himself reward. His eyes narrowed. What kind of cargo? Children. Stolen from their beds 2 nights past. You do nothing but take and wait. Is us do all fighting and hard work getting back. Have priest among us, and no small hand. I am at magic. Will earn keep or stay out of way. He looked over the rail at the little boat below, conscious of his men slowly gathering and watching, waiting for his reaction. Kids, huh? Twice that? He asked, eyeing the swinging bag of gold. I don't know. I have a thing about women on my ship. She's not a woman, she's a gypsy, Adric bellowed. Gypsy, good luck, he called in his best imitation of her accent. She laughed, leaning back dangerously. She hopped up, landed standing on the rail, and turned a neat little pirouette. A shower of tiny blue sparks rained down on them, touching each sailor who gathered. Luck, unit? What is better luck than Romeri Princess? With that, she called up a series of poltergeists, seeming to summon up the winds to fill the sails. She stopped, and the sails fell completely flat. What say, Captain? I say get off of there before you end up in the drink and I lose out on the rest of this, he snarled, snatching the bag. Move it, you laggards! You! Get a ladder and toss it down. I want to be on the ride before sunrise. Lark hopped to the deck, shifted the poltergeist which she had not fully banished, and used it to haul poor Ivaska up the ship's side and deposit him beside her. The others clambered up quickly enough, and she sent the poltergeist to carry their things. She giggled as she watched Ivaska try to get his sea legs. As a sailor began hauling the ladder back aboard and the boatman shifted his oars and rowed for shore again, the captain came over with a young boy in tow. Villis, he said. He's the cabin boy. He'll take you down where you can get out of the way. Any of you know sailing? I know a bit, sir, Keltry admitted, but probably not enough to be much help and just enough to be in the way. Fine, stay out of it then. As for bunking, I have no room for any of you, so if the lady is not objectionable, you will all get my cabin and I'll bunk with the mate. There should be hammocks enough in the ship's stores. Ma'am, I trust the animal there will keep you out of trouble in that manner? She smiled, fondling Ivaska's ears. Haven't had any trouble yet, sir. Not with these fine gentlemen. Right, he grunted. Now, you want to call up that wind again, miss? Certainly. She swung her arm in a wide arc as if to throw a handful of wind into the sail. The willow-wispies flew from her palm to settle like stars in the rigging. The poltergeist called up a nice headwind, and the ship eagerly leapt forward in the water. Thank you. Now, which of you knows where you're having me take you, and would you care to show me? Rog elbowed his way forward. If you'll just show me to a charting table, I might be able to do just that. If the fortune-teller will join us, he added pointedly. After all, Lark, you're the one who told us where it is. She sighed. We'll try, but no promises. The cabin boy led them down below to a comfortable room at the rear of the vessel under the quarterdeck. It was about twice the size of Lark's caravan, and contained a sturdy table nailed to the floor and 3 chairs. There was even a trio of leather-bound books neatly stacked amid the slew of rolling charts. The captain joined them shortly as they were finding places to stow their gear. The cabin boy vanished. Rog unrolled his map. Here's where we think they might be, he said. We were about here when she said they were going southwest, so I figured... Lark tuned them out completely, gazing with interest at a large, detailed map that consisted mostly of water, with ports and landfalls clearly marked on its edges. She noticed what looked to be a river amidst complex markings, flowing from far north to far south, and off the map on both ends, though it curved a bit here and there. She thought about the children, and the ship that must have taken them away, but nothing flared on the wall. No gut feeling or sudden insights. She kept coming back to the stream in the middle of the ocean. She reached up, ran her fingers along the smooth surface of the paper, feeling the unevenness of the wall behind it. Still nothing. What is river in middle of water? She asked. The men at the table looked up. River? Rog asked. What is she talking about? Here, she pointed. Looks like rivers on Rog's map, but is ocean here, is not? The captain, suddenly realizing what she was talking about, laughed. Ah, yes, that is the ride. Yes, it is very like a river in the ocean. It is a strong current that runs south along the coastlines. It is a very common trade route, cuts days off travel time. That is where I was headed before I took you aboard. It is where I will go when I leave you at Portswain. I can't seem to find any islands. That might be it, Rog complained. Lark, maybe you... She turned back to the map on the wall. Won't, she said. It's not on map. How are you... He sputtered. Because cannot find it, that's why. This map be better than yours, and is not here. So, what's the head, miss? The captain mocked. Take right. But the island, Rog started. Fate will take us, Rog. Just as got us here will get us there. As the cabin boy returned with his arms full of hammocks, the strains of pipes and a small drum drifted into the room. Savarin looked around, confused. It's just the crew piper, the captain explained. We should be well underway by now, thanks to your ghost wind. A devilish gleam entered Lark's eyes. Lark, resist it, Landros warned, making a fairly accurate guess as to what that look meant. Resist? She grinned, turning her brilliant blue eyes on him. It's no resist. It's Sagavis, Siskets. Lark, what are you up to? Keltry asked, suddenly concerned. No, Sisket, Landros insisted, still trying to talk her out of it. What is Sagavis? Rog asked. Sagavis is, how you say, in blood. Once there, cannot resist. Can only surrender. Is drive you for always. There was an excitement in her that was very contagious, uncontainable. I'm doomed, Landros thought suddenly. That one word summed her up completely as far as he was concerned. Sagavis. Lark whirled out of the room and up onto the deck, letting loose a swirl of will-o-wisps as she went. Adric watched her go, looked over at the scowl on Landros's face. Is she going to do what I think she's going to do? He asked, trying to hide his smile. Yes, his friend growled. He put his arm around Landros's shoulder, sighed with compassion. I do not know why you even try, Landros. Honestly, that woman is a force of nature, and you can't resist nature. May as well tell the wind not to blow. What exactly is that girl going to do? The captain asked suspiciously. There was a twinkle of delight in Adric's eyes. He looked over his shoulder. Dance. What else? Dance? Savarin asked. Ever seen a Romeri dance? Keltry asked. Savarin shook his head. Come on, this is one experience the wood has nothing on. Rog, you coming? He asked the dwarf. Rog concentrated on tying his hammock off. Nah, I'll stay here. Guard our things. Getting tired, you know. Long walk today for my short little legs. Suit yourself, Adric shrugged and escorted Landros with a comradely arm up onto the deck. The captain waved the others out of the room ahead of him, stopped to fetch something from a small carved chest in a cubbyhole. He pulled out a bit of reddish-orange root and handed it wordlessly to the dwarf. Rog stared at the strange, strongly-smelling cube, wrinkled his nose. What is this? Eat it, the captain said. My friend Froy Greyslung swears by the stuff for putting your stomach more in tune with the sea. Greyslung, he muttered. A Greyslung, a sailor? No, the captain laughed, but he travels with me sometimes when he has to. I know dwarven ways, my friend. Well enough, anyway. It's yours either way. He put the cube in his hand and left the room. On deck, the small band found perches on barrels and rope coils and any free space they could in a circle around 3 figures dancing in the middle. Even Avaska had found a place to lay down and watch. Lark was learning the hornpipe from the 2 sailors on either side of her, and still dancing circles around them. She made up steps when they did not come fast enough or did not suit her. Landros watched her intently as she laughed and danced. She was breathing easily in spite of her exertion, but she was flushed with elation. She told no story tonight, at least not so far. Her movements were expressions of sheer joy, and it seemed her bare feet hardly touched the deck. The sailors around them clapped the beat, swapping out with the pair dancing with her when they became too tired to continue. Music filled the night, filled the sails, and echoed across the water joyously. The music ended, and the sailors collapsed tiredly to the deck. Lark stopped, turning from one to the other of the ring of men, laughing, out of breath. She caught Landros's eye from his perch halfway up the quarterdeck steps. She smiled, sultry, as if sharing a secret. She closed her eyes, concentrating. One by one the lanterns went out. One by one the tiny wear-lights she had set in the rigging descended to her, filling her with an unearthly glow. She conjured a large, sheer scarf out of the air and spread it between her hands. She began to turn slowly, gazing at every man in turn through the cloth laced with tiny starlights. Music began somewhere over the water, a slow, haunting violin. The sailors at first looked about them in fear. One even made the warding against the evil eye, but was knocked harshly by his neighbor. She smiled, saw the captain leaning warily against the wall of the quarterdeck, not sure yet what to make of her, or her effect on his crew. From the depths of the stairwell to the berths she saw the glint of Rogg's pipe. Adric sat watching with his chin propped in his hand, with his elbow on a barrel. Savarin gaped in awe at the sinuous and subtle movements of her body. Keltry smiled knowingly, turned his gaze up to the steps behind him, to where Landros watched from his dark perch. His stare was intense, locked on more than merely her movements. Lark waited, swaying slowly until she got the feel of the ocean and the waves and the wind and the night. When it was right, she moved with it, translating the songs of the wild seas through her body to these men who knew them intimately. They knew the subtle ripple of the seaweed in the currents, the crashing of waves on the prow of a ship, the snap of the sails, the power of a raw storm. All these things she danced, as clearly as if she had sung them. The music she played was an extension of herself, as ghostly as the instrument on which she played it. Her steps, rhythmic and smooth, though unpredictable, like the tides she emulated. She danced not long, but it seemed she had portrayed a lifetime at sea, and taken a lifetime to do it. As quickly as she began, she allowed the real flame lights to pop back to life and began to tap another beat, a wild, rollicking sailor's melody which the piper was glad to join in. She pulled 2 or 3 of the sailors to their feet, encouraging all to dance, even Savarin, then left him to their tender mercies, slipping out on nearly silent feet towards the bowsprit. She glanced over her shoulder at Landros, then turned and walked into the darkness. Ivaska looked up, watching her go, but did not follow. The captain leaned towards Keltry, guiding his attention to the now empty steps with a twitch of his head. The sirens have competition tonight. Keltry shook his head, paring his nails carefully with a small knife. I don't think sirens have anything on our lark, at least not where that one is concerned, he smiled. He nodded his head to where the curls of pipe smoke were thinning. Even the dwarf is soft on her, I think, he whispered. The captain raised an eyebrow. And yourself? He smirked. Keltry cleaned his knife and put it away, shook his head again. Me? I owe that wonderful girl my life. But I think her heart has made up its mind already. That'll be trouble, the captain mused, slipping a finger under his eye patch to rub the eye. No kidding, Keltry chuckled. He peered into the darkness after the vanished pair. I think that I shall call it a night, folks. Party as you wish. Don't worry about keeping me awake, he grinned. You won't. Adric waved him absently off, sipping at a mug of warmed rum someone had handed him. Savarin tumbled to the deck beside him and drank deeply from the mug that Adric passed him. He lay back, sighing happily, setting it aside. He rested a second, then sat up, looking about for Lark. Where? He began. Adric gestured off towards the front of the ship. Savarin looked, squinting, trying to see her. Against the faint glow of moonlight on the horizon, he barely saw her silhouette at the rail, and the figure of someone approaching her. He scrambled to his feet, but Adric pulled him back to the deck, pressed another mug into his hand. But, he protested, pointing. Adric pointed to the steps of the quarterdeck where Landros had been sitting. Savarin sank back down. Oh. He took a deep drink. Lark leaned on the rail, gazing out on the expanse of the water as the moon began to rise. It was not long before she felt Landros join her. He stood behind her for a full 3 minutes, watching the wind whipping through her hair and clothes, haloed by the pale sliver of light. He wanted to slip behind her, to wrap his arms around her and hold her to him, to breathe in the intoxicating scent of her, to feel her warm body against his chest, her silken hair against his face, and her soft breasts in his hands. He snapped his thoughts back in line, took a deep breath, let it out slowly. He moved to the rail beside her, just upwind so that her hair would not obscure his view of her, or sting his face, or her scent continue to drive him insane. Together, neither saying a word, they watched the moon rise, thin and pale over the horizon's edge. There was nothing about them but rippling waves and tiny glimmers of fish leaping about. Even the sailors and the music seemed miles away, coming to them from a great distance. There, she pointed suddenly. Just coming over the edge of sea, she said. You see? Star just below tip of moon? Yes, he whispered. Not sure why he whispered. It just seemed right. Just below is 4 other stars. Make Win, rune of joy. Is sign I was born under. Is what I do. I'm joy bringer. Is what Ilyana means. That is rising tonight means good things. Means there will be joy for coming home. Only happen if have children. So, follow Wind's tail, and there we'll find children. They waited, watched as the rest of the constellation rose. Not knowing what the rune looked like, Landros could not really see it, but he took pleasure in what it meant to her. She was, really, when he thought about it, peace-bringer, joy-bearer. He could have used one of those a half-century ago. You will have to tell me my fortune one evening, when we are alone and in a quiet place, he said, surprising himself as he did so. Most certainly. Always pleased to read fortunes of others. Why doesn't he kiss me? She wondered. She was surprised by the thought as she gazed at him, but it was what she wanted. That, too, surprised her. He looked deep into her eyes, black in the dimness. Kiss me, they seemed to say. But no, surely he was reading his wishes into things. After a minute, she looked away, disappointed. They gazed out over the water for a long time in silence. After a while, the music died down, and all that remained was the sea, singing the same unchanging melody she had sung from the beginning of time, an eternal aria. Sleep began to invade thoughts. Landros took her hand, turned towards the stern. Let's go in, he whispered. It's late. She slipped her hand out of his, suddenly terrified of the thought of sleep. No. She pulled her shawl closer over her shoulders. You go. We'll be fine. Cannot sleep now. She gazed at the hurt expression on his face and wanted so much to go with him, even knowing that they could not be together. She touched his cheek softly. Too much sleep last night? She asked with a faint smile. Too much excitement this one. He covered her hand with his, resisted the urge to kiss it. If that is what you want. Lark nodded. He sighed, turned away. He looked back only once at her, to see her standing sideways, staring out to sea as if mesmerized by it. He stuffed the unidentified feelings that were threatening to overwhelm him deep inside and went to the cabin, determined not to think about her. He only succeeded until he fell asleep, and then she filled his dreams with fragrance and warmth and passion and soft, billowy clouds of silk and lights.